Wyoming. The late July, the world was the color of dust and dying grass, the sky a furious swirl of ochre and gray, wind howling like a thing unchained across the endless rolling plains. Josie Blackwood, just 11 years old and already carrying more hurt than she could say, pressed a trembling hand against her brow, fighting to see through the grit and sand lashing her face. Each step was harder than the last. She'd gotten turned around searching for her grandma's lost border collie, Scout, and now every direction looked the same. Pale, scrubby ground, ghostly sage, nothing but the roar of the wind and the taste of fear at the back of her throat. Scout had vanished behind a rocky outcrop half an hour ago. Josie had followed, shouting his name, once or twice, but the dog's excited barking had faded, swallowed up by the storm rolling in from the west. She'd tried to retrace her steps, but her footprints disappeared almost instantly, blown away by the restless wind. Now, the sky was churning overhead, darker and angrier by the minute. Lightning forked across the clouds. Thunder answered, deep and low, making her heart trip in her chest. Josie knew she had to find shelter. Grandma Evelyn always said you couldn't trust the weather out here. A blue sky could turn on you in 5 minutes, and a dust storm was nothing to play with. Her sneakers skidded on loose gravel as she ran for the biggest boulder she could see, lungs burning, dust stinging her eyes. She huddled behind it, knees drawn up to her chin, arms wrapped around herself so tight she felt like she might disappear if she let go. As she tried not to cry. She was done crying, or so she'd told herself in the weeks since the accident, but the tears came anyway, silent and hot, cutting through the grime on her cheeks. In the chaos of wind and grit, she closed her eyes and pictured her parents, Mom's laugh, Dad's big, warm hand around hers. They'd been gone 2 months. Sometimes Josie wondered if she'd ever find her way back from the space that had opened up inside her when they left. She hadn't spoken since the funeral. Not a word. What was the point? The storm battered the land, rattling the rocks around her. She squeezed her eyes shut tighter. The wind shrieked. Every instinct told her to curl smaller, hold still, wait it out. Alone. But that was the only thing she was certain of anymore. But then the air changed. Subtle at first, like the hush before rain, or the moment in a nightmare when you sense you're not alone. Josie's eyes fluttered open. Through her tear-blurred lashes, she glimpsed movement, not the jittery, mindless shifting of tumbleweeds, but something alive. Several somethings, shapes, darker than the storm itself, flowing in from the prairie in utter silence. Horses. A whole herd of them. Ghosts in the grit, wild and wary and impossibly close. Their hooves barely made a sound on the hard earth. Manes tangled and tails streaming, they moved in a slow, purposeful circle, surrounding her and the boulder. Josie's breath caught. She'd seen wild mustangs before, usually from far away, shimmering in the summer heat like something half-imagined. But this was different. This was real. And they were here for her. At their head, a stallion stepped forward, his body slick with sweat and dust, muscles bunching under a coal-black hide. A jagged white blaze ran down his face, sharp as a lightning bolt. He stopped barely 10 feet from Josie, nostrils flaring, eyes so dark and deep she felt like she could fall into them forever. He stood there, unmoving, while the rest of the herd closed ranks around her, shoulder to shoulder, facing out toward the storm. Time stretched, then bent. Josie didn't move, didn't breathe. She was too small, too broken, too lost. But the stallion, Star, she would call him later, though she didn't know his name yet, kept his gaze on her, steady and sure, as if daring the world to try and harm what he protected. For hours the wind raged. Lightning flashed again, thunder following close behind. Dust whirled around the horses, coating their flanks, tangling in their tails. But they did not flinch, did not scatter, not even when the worst of the storm slammed into them, wind howling like it wanted to rip the world apart. Star lowered his head, stepped between Josie and the onslaught, mane whipping like a battle flag, The others pressed closer, the circle tightening until she was cocooned in warmth and the scent of wild horses, sweat, sage, sun, and freedom. Josie's fear ebbed, replaced by something she hadn't felt in weeks: awe. For the first time since the accident, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel empty. She just felt seen, important, like she belonged, even if only for a moment, to this living, breathing force of nature that had claimed her as their own. Somewhere out on the wind, she thought she heard scout bark. Or maybe it was just the wind's trick. Either way, she buried her face in her knees, shivering, and let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this night would end. At last, dawn bled slowly into the sky, a pale, trembling light that made the world seem possible again. The storm was gone. The air was fresh and sharp with the promise of new beginnings. Josie uncurled, blinking in the strange, gentle quiet. Around her, the mustangs stood watchful, manes glowing in the sunrise, eyes soft. Star met her gaze one more time. For a heartbeat, something passed between them, not words, but a feeling. Courage, kindness. The promise that sometimes what's wild won't run away. One by one, the mustangs turned and melted back into the morning mist. Star was the last to leave, pausing on a nearby ridge, his silhouette proud and unbreakable against the new day. Josie watched him go, feeling the first fragile sprout of hope take root inside her chest. She wasn't sure if anyone would believe her. She wasn't even sure what had happened, really. But she knew this. She was not alone. Anymore. And somewhere, out there in the wild Wyoming hills, a black stallion with a star-shaped blaze was watching over her still. Voiceover, as if whispered by the wind itself. Some say horses run from danger. This one stepped between her and the storm. Morning painted the Wyoming landscape with golden light. The storm's wreckage slowly revealed across the fields and gullies. At the edge of her grandmother's land, Josie Blackwood trudged through the tangled grasses, the dawn chill nipping at her cheeks, her shoes caked with mud. The world felt quieter after the storm, the air somehow cleaner, as if even the sky was taking a deep breath after all that rage. Josie paused every few steps, scanning the horizon. The mustangs had disappeared with the sun, as silent and mysterious as they'd arrived, but she felt their presence lingering, a tingling sense of being watched over, like the brush of a feather against her heart. In her hand, she clutched Scout's collar, the dog found huddled near the barn at sunrise, shivering, but safe. Grandma Evelyn had hugged Josie hard, whispering words of thanks that Josie didn't answer. Josie only nodded, the weight of the night clinging to her like a secret. Home was an old ranch house, weathered by wind and years, its porch sagging, paint peeling, a battered welcome sign hanging by a thread. Josie's room looked out toward the distant hills where the mustangs had vanished. She sat at her desk, not ready to sleep, not ready to talk. Instead, she pulled out her sketchbook, the only place where her world made sense now. With careful strokes, she drew the black stallion, capturing the sharp blaze across his face, the impossible strength in his eyes. Her hands moved almost of their own accord, memory guiding her pencil more surely than any words could. The house was quiet, except for the ticking of the old kitchen clock and Scout's occasional restless whining. Downstairs, Grandma Evelyn moved around the kitchen, humming a tune Josie remembered from when she was little. Before everything changed. Before the accident that left her floating and unanchored in a world she didn't recognize. Evelyn tried to fill the house with warmth, pancakes in the morning, fresh sheets on the bed, gentle questions asked, and then quickly left alone when Josie gave no answer. She loved her granddaughter fiercely. But she was a practical woman, raised on hardship, not sentiment. Grief was something you tucked into a drawer and carried on. Or so she believed. But Josie's grief had shut her down. The accident that took her parents had left her in a kind of waking sleep, her voice lost somewhere in the wreckage. Weeks had passed since she'd spoken, her words buried deep, unreachable. The doctors called it selective mutism, a shield her mind had built for protection. To Josie, it just felt like emptiness. That morning, the house phone rang. Evelyn's voice carried up the stairs, muffled but concerned. Josie heard her say, "She's all right, just shaken. The horses? No, I haven't seen them this close before." She didn't mention Josie's silence, didn't mention how scared she'd been, searching the fields at dawn with a flashlight, calling for a granddaughter who would not answer back. Josie listened from her doorway, guilt and relief warring in her chest. When the call ended, Evelyn appeared in Josie's doorway, her hand wrapped around a chipped coffee mug. She hovered there a moment, looking at Josie's hunched shoulders, the way her hair fell forward to shield her face. "I made pancakes, hon. Whenever you're ready," she said, voice soft, eyes searching Josie's face for any flicker of response. Josie nodded. She wanted to say thank you. She wanted to say she was sorry for worrying her grandmother, for not being easier to love. But the words jammed in her throat like a pebble caught in a riverbed. She set her sketchbook aside and padded downstairs, Scout trailing behind her, nails clicking on the old wooden floor. Breakfast was quiet. Evelyn asked gentle questions about the storm, about Scout, about whether Josie was cold during the night. Josie shook her head, her fingers wrapped tight around her fork. Evelyn watched her with a kind of desperate hope, as if waiting for a miracle that would make her granddaughter whole again. After breakfast, Josie slipped outside with her sketchbook, drawn to the ridge beyond the barn. The sun was climbing higher, burning away the last traces of the storm. She climbed the rocky slope, boots crunching in the gravel, until she reached the place where she'd last seen the horses. Her heart thudded with anticipation, hope flickering against her ribs. She didn't have to wait long. On the far edge of the ridge, silhouetted against the blue Wyoming sky, stood Star, alone now, but proud, his head high, mane lifting in the wind. Josie stopped, breathless, barely daring to move. The stallion watched her with those deep, knowing eyes. He pawed the earth as if to say, "I remember you." Josie sat cross-legged, flipping open her sketchbook, and started to draw again. This time, the strokes were faster, more urgent, as if capturing the magic would make it real. Star stood his ground, unmoving, sentinel-like. For a long while, it was just the two of them, a silent, sacred moment, broken only by the distant call of a hawk. Josie didn't notice she was being watched until a shadow fell across her shoulder. She startled, clutching her sketchbook to her chest, but it was only Grandma Evelyn, carrying a thermos of hot chocolate. "Did you see them again?" Evelyn asked, peering into the distance. She followed Josie's gaze to the stallion on the ridge. Josie nodded, holding out her drawing with tentative hands. Evelyn took it, her rough fingers gentle, as she traced the lines of Star's proud face. "He's a beauty," Evelyn murmured. "You know, some folks around here say the mustangs are lucky. Spirits of the plains, they say." She looked at Josie, trying to read her expression. "Maybe they're looking out for you too?" Josie's throat tightened. She looked down, blinking hard. The rest of the day passed in a kind of dream. Josie wandered the property, her eyes always drawn to the hills, to the hope that the horses would reappear. In the barn, she found an old bridle, the leather worn soft by years of use. She touched it reverently, wondering if Star had ever been tamed, or if he'd always been wild. If being wild was what kept him safe. That evening, as the sky burned orange and purple with the promise of another storm, Josie sat on the porch steps, Scout curled up at her side. She watched the hills, searching for any sign of movement, and just as the first stars appeared, she saw him again, Star, outlined by the fading light, standing sentinel over the land. For the first time since her parents died, Josie felt the faintest spark of something new, not quite hope, but a question. If Star could survive the storms, maybe she could too? Inside, Evelyn watched her granddaughter with quiet worry, her hands folded in her lap. She wanted to reach out, to fix what was broken, but some wounds had to heal in their own time, their own way. And so, another day ended. A silent truce between past and present, grief in the promise of something wild and untamed, waiting just beyond the horizon. Josie hadn't spoken in weeks, but as she fell asleep that night, she whispered one word into the dark, so quietly even she barely heard it. Star. News of Josie's harrowing night in the storm spread quickly through the small Wyoming community. Evelyn, never one for gossip, had only mentioned it to the nearest neighbor out of relief. But in a town where everyone's business was everyone's business, stories traveled on the wind. By mid-morning, a steady trickle of well-meaning neighbors came by the ranch, some with casseroles, others just wanting to check on Evelyn's girl. Josie hid from them all, peeking from behind curtains, notebook pressed to her chest like a shield. By the time afternoon rolled around, the summer air buzzed with the sound of insects and the distant drone of a four-wheeler. Josie, perched on her favorite rock with Scout at her side, was sketching again. This time, not just Star, but the whole circle of mustangs from the night before. The memory was burned into her mind, every detail sharp as the sunrise. The dark stallion with his lightning blaze, the way the herd stood together, shielding her from the storm. She was so absorbed in her drawing that she didn't notice the old green Jeep crawling up the ranch drive until Scout barked, ears pricking. The Jeep stopped with a squeak of tired brakes. A woman stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, with gray-streaked hair pulled into a ponytail, skin leathered from sun and wind, and eyes the color of weathered wood, kind and deep, but with a sharpness that didn't miss a thing. She wore faded jeans, sturdy boots, and a battered ranger's vest that seemed to have seen more history than the local museum. Josie froze as the woman approached, but Scout wagged his tail, instantly at ease. "Afternoon," the woman called, voice warm but brisk. She crouched, holding out a hand for Scout to sniff. "You must be Josie. I'm Martha Redwater. Used to work as a forest ranger around here. Maybe you've heard my name?" Josie shook her head, wide-eyed but silent. Evelyn stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron, relief flickering in her face. "Martha, it's good to see you," Evelyn called, walking out to meet them. "Heard you were back from Colorado. Josie, this is the woman I told you about. She knows every inch of these hills. Saved half the town's livestock during that big fire a few years back." Martha's gaze drifted from Evelyn to the sketchbook Josie was clutching. Mind if I take a look at what you're working on?" Her tone was gentle, inviting, not pushing. Josie hesitated. Then, with a small nod, she turned the sketchbook so Martha could see the page, a bold drawing of Star, mane flying, standing at the center of his herd, encircling a small, frightened girl. Josie's hands trembled slightly as she held it out, but Martha smiled, genuinely impressed. "That's him," Martha breathed, eyes softening with memory. She ran a finger lightly over the jagged white blaze Josie had so carefully captured. "No doubt about it. That stallion, he's special." Evelyn looked surprised. "You recognize that horse?" Martha nodded, settling down on the grass beside Josie. "About 25 years back, there was a wildfire up by Iron Ridge. I was a rookie ranger, not much older than you, Josie. I found a foal, his mother gone, legs all tangled in barbed wire, terrified out of his mind. Took me hours to cut him free. I named him Starfire, on account of that blaze and the way he ran, like he had the wind trapped in his bones." Martha's voice grew quieter, almost reverent. "He disappeared not long after. Some folks said he got rounded up or wandered off, but I always hoped he made it out here. Found his herd." She looked at Josie's drawing again, then up at the ridge, as if searching for a familiar silhouette. That's him. They're grown now, but still got that fire. I'd stake my life on it." Josie's eyes widened. For the first time, someone else understood the magic she'd seen. She felt her guard lowering just a little. Martha continued, "Most people think mustangs are a nuisance. Not me. Their history on 4 legs. Tough, smart, proud. And that one, he remembers things, holds a grudge if you cross him, but if you help him, he never forgets. I've seen it before with wild things." Evelyn sat down, curiosity blooming on her face. "You think he recognized Josie?" "Wouldn't surprise me," Martha replied. "Horses know fear, They know courage too. Maybe he saw something in her he trusted. Josie listened, hope flickering quietly inside her chest. She wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Did the horse really remember Martha? Why had he saved her? Could he be her friend? But the words sat heavy in her mouth. Instead, she turned another page in her notebook and started to draw again, hands steadier now, emboldened by Martha's acceptance. Martha watched her work, not interrupting. Instead, she told stories about the wild herds she'd tracked, the times she'd stood between poachers and mustangs. The way Starfire had always seemed different from the others. A little smarter, a little braver. She described the rituals of the herd, how they protected each other from wolves and storms, how a true stallion always led from the front. As the afternoon wore on, more neighbors dropped by, lured by curiosity and the rumor of wild horses so close to town. Some cast wary glances at Josie, whispering about that poor Blackwood girl. But Martha stood between them, fierce and proud, making it clear that Josie was not to be pitied but respected. She faced a Wyoming storm and walked out stronger, Martha said, her voice ringing with conviction. Not many adults could say the same. When the last car had driven away and dusk was creeping across the fields, Martha offered Josie a gentle smile. If you ever want to see them up close, let me know. There's a trick to it. Takes patience, a quiet heart, and a lot of respect. But I think you've got what it takes, Josie. Josie met her gaze, a question burning in her eyes. She nodded, hugging her sketchbook to her chest, feeling, maybe for the first time since the accident, a thread of connection pulling her towards something bigger than her grief. Later, after dinner, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, piecing together what she'd learned from Martha. She watched Josie, now curled up by the window, sketching quietly as the stars came out. "You're not alone, Josie," she whispered, mostly to herself. "Not anymore." And out on the ridge, as the sky faded to indigo, the black stallion appeared once more, his form etched against the fading light, silent as a promise. Martha's words echoed in Josie's mind. He remembers. Maybe she would too. In that fragile hope, Josie drifted to sleep, dreams alive with hooves thundering over open plains, the wild and the lost finding each other again in the place where the wind always remembered. Summer in Wyoming had its own rhythm, and hot, restless days, and evenings that simmered with the promise of rain. The sky was wide and endless, but the air felt charged as if the land itself was holding its breath. Josie sensed it too, a tension she couldn't name, hovering at the edge of every conversation in the days after the storm. The mustangs became the talk of the county. A word traveled faster than wind. Some said Josie had dreamed it all, a lonely girl inventing fairy tales. But a few ranchers had seen the herd near the old fence line, their silhouettes wild and proud in the early morning light. For some, it was a miracle. For others, it was trouble. The trouble came in the shape of a polished black SUV that rolled up the gravel drive one afternoon, its windows tinted, its tires stirring up a cloud of dust that lingered long after it stopped. Josie was helping Grandma Evelyn mend a section of broken fence near the road, Scout snoozing at their feet. The ranch was quiet except for the buzzing of grasshoppers and the wind whispering secrets through the sage. The SUV's door opened and a man stepped out, tall, fit, in a crisp blue shirt, pressed jeans, and boots too clean for real ranch work. His hair was perfectly combed, his sunglasses expensive, and his smile, when it came, had the sheen of practiced charm. He strode toward them, extending a hand as if he owned the land already. "Evelyn Blackwood?" he called out, voice smooth as oil. "Victor Langston. I'm with Langston Development Group." He handed her a business card, thick, embossed, the kind that made people pause and take notice. Evelyn took the card, brow furrowed. We're not selling," she said, no greeting, just fact. She was not a woman for small talk, especially not with men in suits. Langston's smile didn't falter. He shaded his eyes, glancing at the rolling hills, the sun-bleached barn, the distant glint of water from the creek. "You've got a beautiful property here, Miss Blackwood. My team's been looking at parcels in this area for a new luxury lodge, and we think the spot, right on the edge of the wild, would be perfect. I'm prepared to make a generous offer, above market value. Enough for you to retire in comfort, fix up the house, maybe even travel a little. Josie felt her heart thump. She watched her grandmother, shoulders set, eyes narrowed. Evelyn didn't flinch. This ranch has been in my family for 3 generations. My son and daughter-in-law put their roots down here. My granddaughter's here now. I don't care about market value. I care about keeping this place safe. Langston's tone softened, sympathetic but insistent. I understand, but times change. Tourism is booming. People want the real West, wildlife, horses, the whole frontier experience. We'll build eco-friendly. We'll respect the history. You can keep your house, at least the grazing rights. Stay as long as you want. He knelt to pet Scout, who sniffed his hand and turned away, unimpressed. Langston's gaze slid to Josie. He studied her, skinny arms, torn jeans, wary eyes. You like horses? He asked, voice honeyed. My company sponsors riding programs. We love the mustangs. Of course, we have to manage them safely. The state'll be rounding them up soon. Anyway, can't risk people getting hurt. Wouldn't want a lawsuit. Evelyn's jaw clenched. Those horses have more right to this land than you do, Mr. Langston. And so do we. Langston straightened, dusting off his pants, face hardening just for a moment before the smile snapped back in place. I hope you'll reconsider, Miss Blackwood. The offer stands. But you should know, if you wait too long, you might lose your chance. I have contacts at the county office. The state can claim eminent domain if there's a safety concern. Josie's breath caught. She watched the 2 adults, feeling the power shift like a cold breeze across her skin. For a split second, she saw her grandma, as everyone else must see her. Small, gray-haired, standing in front of a run-down ranch with nothing but pride and a stubborn heart to shield her. Then she looked at Langston, all money and confidence and certainty. A man used to getting what he wanted. He handed Evelyn a folder, plans, permits, a glossy mock-up of a sprawling lodge perched right where the mustangs grazed. Think about it, he said. I'll be back in a week. With that, he strode to his SUV, got in, and drove away, the engine's purr fading into the distance. Evelyn stood still, her hands shaking ever so slightly. Josie watched her, searching for something, anger, fear, regret. But all she saw was steel. That man's got more nerve than brains, Evelyn muttered, tearing the folder in half and tossing it in the trash barrel. Over my dead body? That night at dinner, the silence between them was heavy. Josie barely touched her food, stomach in knots. She wanted to say something, wanted to promise she'd help, that she wouldn't let the ranch be taken, that the mustangs would stay safe. But the words stuck, tangled with all her other fears. After Evelyn went to bed, Josie sat on the porch steps, hugging her knees, eyes fixed on the blackness beyond the barn. In her mind, she replayed Langston's threats, his certainty that the horses would be removed for safety. She remembered the feeling of the herd around her, Star's steady gaze in the storm. The thought of losing them, of losing this place, made something inside her burn, a tiny coal of anger and resolve. She snuck inside and found her sketchbook. Flipping to a blank page, she drew Langston's SUV, huge and looming, headlights glaring. Then she drew the mustangs, smaller but proud, standing their ground. She sketched herself, tiny but defiant, facing the SUV, her back to the horses, as if she could shield them with her will alone. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she lay awake, listening to the coyotes yip and the old house settle. Sometime after midnight, she heard her grandmother's soft footsteps in the hallway. Pausing outside her door. Evelyn didn't come in, but Josie knew she was there, a silent promise that they were in this together. The next morning, Josie watched the sun rise from the same ridge where she'd first seen Star. The land glowed gold and pink, untouched, wild. She made up her mind. She would not let Langston win. The mustangs had stood guard for her in the storm. Now it was her turn to protect them. She'd start by finding Martha. Maybe, together, they could figure out a way to fight back. But first, Josie turned toward the hills and whispered a promise. Soft, fierce, carried on the Wyoming wind. I won't run, not this time. And somewhere beyond the ridge, a black stallion lifted his head as if he'd heard her, and the sun rose on a new kind of courage. The next morning, Josie woke early, the resolve from the night before burning bright inside her. She lay in bed, watching the sliver of pink light push through her curtains. In that first moment before her thoughts caught up, she almost felt like the old Josie. Before loss, before storms, before she'd learned to build walls around her heart. But then, her worries returned. Langston's threat, the fate of the mustangs, the look in her grandmother's eyes as she threw the developer's glossy folder in the trash. Josie pulled on her boots and jeans and crept downstairs, careful not to wake Evelyn. Scout followed, tail wagging, his presence a comfort, as she slipped out the kitchen door into the crisp morning. The ranch was still, dew sparkling on the grass, the hush broken only by a distant hawk's cry. Josie took a shortcut past the old corral and slipped through the break in the fence, heading for the gravel road that wound toward town. She wasn't sure what she'd say, but she knew she had to find Martha Redwater. If anyone knew how to help the mustangs, and maybe stand up to men like Langston, it was the ranger who remembered what it meant to fight for the wild. Josie kept her head down as she walked the road's edge, her shadow stretching long and thin across the dirt. At the old crossroads, a battered pickup truck rumbled past, the driver waving without slowing. Josie watched it disappear, heart thudding. She felt small in the vastness of the Wyoming landscape. But each step forward built a quiet, stubborn courage. At the edge of town, the wind picked up, tossing her hair across her face. She turned down a gravel driveway lined with lilacs. Martha's place, a cabin that looked like it had grown out of the earth itself. Old tools and weathered boots cluttered the porch. Josie paused, nerves jangling. Then she rapped on the door, Scout barking his encouragement. Martha answered in her usual style. No nonsense, already wearing boots and a ranger's vest, mug of coffee in hand. She took in Josie's anxious face, her tightly clenched fist, and nodded as if she'd been expecting her. "You want to help the mustangs," Martha said, not a question, but a statement. "And you want to stop Langston?" Josie nodded, swallowing hard. She offered her sketchbook, open to a new drawing, a map of the hills, the herd's favorite grazing grounds, and a stick figure version of herself standing between a mustang and a faceless man in a suit. Martha's eyes crinkled in approval. "Come on in," Martha said, stepping aside. "We've got work to do." Inside, the cabin smelled of coffee, cedar, and something smoky. Maps of the range covered one wall, photos of wild horses, rangers, and even a younger Martha hung in uneven rows. Josie sat at the kitchen table while Martha poured 2 mugs of cocoa, one for herself, one for Josie, topped with 2 mini marshmallows. The adult sat across from her, eyes serious. "We can't do this alone. But there are people in this town who care more about the land than money. We find them, we get organized, we fight smart." Martha reached for her ancient flip phone, dialing a number from memory. "I'm calling Iris," she said. "Best vet in the county. Grew up wild herself. If anyone can speak for the mustangs, it's her." Within the hour, Iris Tanaka arrived. A petite woman with a shock of indigo hair under a faded ball cap, and sleeves rolled up to reveal tattooed arms. Wildflowers, horses, a snake coiled around her wrist. She moved with purpose, her sharp brown eyes taking in Josie with a mixture of curiosity and kindness. "You must be the brave one I've been hearing about," she said, shaking Josie's hand. "You've got grit, kid." As the three huddled over maps and coffee, the plan began to form. Iris explained, "If we can prove the mustangs are special, endangered, or carrying rare bloodlines, the government can't just sweep them away. I've got contacts at the university who'll run the DNA tests if I can get a sample. We just need time, and proof. Josie listened, hope blooming in her chest. She'd never felt part of something before. Not really. Now she found herself at the center of a whirlwind. The next addition to their growing movement was Theo, a young wildlife videographer known for his documentaries on prairie wolves and bighorn sheep. He rolled up on a battered motorcycle, camera gear strapped to his back, hair windswept and a glint of mischief in his eye. "Heard there's a story in these hills," he said, grinning at Josie. "If Langston wants to take the land, let's give the world a reason to care." Theo quickly set up his equipment, eager to film the mustangs in action, to capture their beauty and wildness before it could be erased by bulldozers. He asked Josie to point out where she'd seen the herd. Josie, shy but determined, sketched a map for him, showing where Star had led his herd to safety after the storm. By midday, the unlikely team gathered on Martha's porch. A retired ranger, a tough-as-nails vet, a hopeful wildlife filmmaker, and an 11-year-old girl who still hadn't spoken in weeks, but whose eyes spoke volumes. Iris's old truck idled in the driveway, ready to go. Just as they were about to leave, a thunderous rumble echoed from the main road. A column of motorcycles snaked toward the cabin, dust trailing behind. At the front rode a burly man with a braided gray beard and a leather vest patched with the words, "Iron Ridge Riders." The club, everyone knew, was a brotherhood of local bikers who rode to honor their friend Tommy, a Mustang lover who died rescuing a foal years back. The riders had a reputation for trouble, but also for loyalty. The leader, Hawk, pulled off his helmet and nodded at Martha. "Heard you might need a little muscle," he said, grinning. "Tommy always said the Mustangs needed friends. We ain't letting no city slicker chase them off." Martha clasped Hawk's hand. "You got that right." Theo filmed as the riders parked their bikes, each one removing their helmets, revealing faces marked by sun, wind, and resolve. The youngest member, a woman named Jay with bright green hair and a sleeve of Mustang tattoos, fist bumped Josie. "You're the girl from the storm," she said. "You got guts." It was an odd, wonderful gathering. Bikers, scientists, old cowgirls, and a silent kid, united by a cause bigger than any of them. They planned, argued, made lists. Iris assigned tasks, sample collection, contacting university experts, getting the herd story to social media. Theo drew up storyboards, eager to upload a teaser video that afternoon. Hawk sent the riders to patrol the back roads, keeping an eye out for any sign of Langston surveyors or state trucks. Through it all, Josie watched and listened, her sketchbook filling with faces. Grizzled bikers, tough women, a smiling cameraman, all surrounding the Mustangs like her own circle of hooves. When the riders left, they promised, "No one messes with the herd on our watch." As dusk painted the sky in streaks of purple and gold, the team sat around Martha's porch, exhausted but energized, united in purpose. Josie felt something new. Not just hope, but belonging. Iris squeezed Josie's shoulder. "You're braver than you know, kid. You started this. Let's finish it." That night, for the first time, Josie dreamed of voices, her own among them, strong and clear, calling across the plains. She woke to the sound of Mustang hoofbeats in the morning, and for the first time in weeks, she almost smiled. The world felt different now that Josie was part of something bigger. The kitchen table at Martha's cabin had become headquarters. Maps, field notes, half-eaten sandwiches, and laptops scattered in the middle, surrounded by people who'd started as strangers and now felt like the front line in a battle. Outside, the late summer wind carried the distant, unmistakable sound of Mustang hooves, every echo sharpening Josie's determination. For 2 days, the team worked tirelessly. Theo, the wildlife videographer, captured stunning footage. Star leading his herd through golden grass, the Mustangs' manes whipping in the breeze, foals racing beside their mothers. Iris, the vet, worked just as hard, setting up field labs on the back of her pickup, collecting stray hairs and carefully snipping tiny pieces from tangled manes and tails whenever a horse strayed close to the fence. On the third morning, Iris brought big news. She burst through Martha's cabin door, still in mud-splattered boots, clutching an email printout from the university genetics lab. "Read this," she said, barely containing her excitement. "The mustangs out here, they've got Spanish colonial markers. There aren't many herds like this left. These bloodlines are rare, or they might even qualify for federal protection under the Wild Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act. This isn't just local anymore. This is national news." Josie's eyes widened. She'd heard talk in town about Spanish mustangs before, but nobody had ever confirmed it. The idea that Starr and his herd could be a part of American history, survivors from the old conquistadors' time, filled her with a strange pride. Maybe now the world would have to listen. Theo grinned. "This is exactly what we need. If I can get a short video up today, showing the horses, talking about the bloodlines, it'll go viral. People all over will care, not just our little town. Langston won't be able to operate in the shadows." Martha was less convinced. She knew that exposure could be a double-edged sword. It'll draw attention, yes, good and bad. Langston's got friends in high places. If he thinks he's running out of time, he'll push back hard. Iris was already texting her contacts at the Bureau of Land Management and Wildlife Protection groups. Josie watched it all, hope and anxiety twining inside her like rival vines. For the first time since her parents' accident, her voice nearly bubbled to the surface. She wanted to thank them, shout, laugh. Instead, she drew the scene. A wild herd running with a camera crew and scientists in pursuit, a shadowy figure lurking at the edge of the frame. By noon, Theo's first video was online. In it, he narrated the footage with a sense of awe and urgency, introducing Josie as the silent witness who survived a storm, guarded by mustangs, hinting at the bloodlines, ending with a plea for help. "If we don't act now, these horses could vanish forever. Share this. Stand with us." Within hours, views climbed past 50,000. Comments poured in, some from old ranchers who remembered the wild herds from their childhood, some from city folks who'd never seen a Mustang but felt their spirit. News stations started calling, hashtags began trending. Josie, who had once felt invisible, now saw her face, shy, serious, determined, circulating all over the internet. Langston noticed, too. That afternoon, as Martha and Josie returned from checking on the herd, they found a white county truck parked outside of the ranch. A local land officer, Mr. Pennington, was waiting, clipboard in hand, face tight with stress. Evelyn met them at the porch. "He says there's a public safety concern," she announced, arms crossed. "He's got an order for an emergency roundup, effective immediately. Says the horses have been reported near the highway. It's a danger to drivers." Josie's stomach dropped. She stared at Pennington, trying to see if he believed the words he was saying. "I'm sorry," he said, not meeting her eyes. "We don't have a choice. Orders from higher up." Langston's shadow hung heavy over the scene, his influence clear, even if he wasn't there himself. Martha stepped in front of Josie, her voice cold and sharp as broken glass. "This is a setup, and you know it. There's never been a major incident with these horses. Who filed the complaint?" Pennington hesitated. "Anonymous tip." "But my hands are tied." Iris pulled up the university lab results, thrusting them in Pennington's face. "These horses are protected by federal law. If these bloodlines are confirmed, you touch them, you could be facing more than angry neighbors." Pennington looked uneasy, but wouldn't back down. "I have to follow orders. The roundup's happening. They'll use helicopters if they have to." That night, the team convened at Martha's, tempers flaring. Theo had caught footage of Pennington's arrival, uploading it as proof that outside forces were moving against them. Comments flooded in, calling for intervention, and the video reached the state's news. Josie, who still hadn't spoken a word aloud, scribbled a note and passed it around. "What if they come tomorrow? What can we do?" The answer came from an unlikely source, Jay, the young Iron Ridge rider, whose tattooed arms were folded tight across her chest. "We have friends who work at the county office. If someone's forging safety reports, they'll know. Let's check the records." Theo and Hawk, the riders' leaders, spent half the night tracing digital trails, and calling in favors. Just before midnight, they found it. A doctored incident report filed by Pennington himself. Under pressure from Langston, it claimed wild horses had caused multiple highway accidents that, upon investigation, didn't exist. It was a lie. They filmed Pennington the next morning, confronting him with the truth. The official broke down, admitting on camera that Langston had threatened his job if he didn't comply. The video, raw, emotional, undeniable, was uploaded within the hour, and in a matter of hours, it went viral. But Langston was already moving. His team of contractors and wranglers rolled into town under the cover of dawn, bringing with them helicopters, portable fences, and state wildlife agents. They claimed to have all the permits, all the paperwork in order. They were going to deal with the Mustang problem once and for all. Martha was furious. They're using an emergency loophole. They're not waiting for a confirmation on the bloodlines. They think they can snatch the herd before anyone stops them. Iris, voice trembling with outrage, swore she'd get a federal injunction, but the wheels of justice turned slow. Josie, drawing furiously, sketched the helicopters hovering over wild, panicked horses, her fingers smudging the pencil lines in her frustration. That night, as wind rattled the windows, Josie slipped outside, standing under the vast Wyoming sky. She pressed her hand to the earth, listening for the thunder of hooves. The mustangs were out there, frightened but unbroken. She made a vow, silent but fierce. They saved me from the storm. Now it's my turn to save them from what's coming. Inside, the team worked late into the night, plotting, hoping, fearing. The real fight, they all knew, would come with the dawn. Dawn broke cold and clear, the sky washed in streaks of lavender and gold. But the promise of a beautiful Wyoming morning felt like a cruel joke, because as the first sunlight touched the hills, the sound of helicopter blades shattered the silence. Josie jerked awake, heart pounding, the old house rattling with the distant thrum. She scrambled out of bed, boots thudding on the floor, fear spiking through her veins. She raced to the window. In the distance, dust spiraled into the air as vehicles, trucks, trailers, and official-looking SUVs snaked their way across the plains. Above, a black helicopter wheeled in slow, predatory circles, sending shadows skittering across the land. Josie felt a flash of panic, then anger. This was really happening. Langston wasn't bluffing. He was coming for the Mustangs. And Evelyn met Josie in the hallway, already dressed, jaw set. "Get your things, honey. We're going to Martha's." By the time they reached the ranger's cabin, the makeshift headquarters was alive with tension. Martha was already on her radio, barking orders to the Iron Ridge riders scattered across the county's back roads. Iris was hunched over her laptop, sending desperate emails to state officials and animal welfare groups. Theo, eyes wild, checked his camera gear and drone batteries. Even Hawk and Jay, the riders, looked shaken. "They've blocked every county road leading into the canyons," Hawk reported. "Wranglers on ATVs, fences going up. They're going to drive the herd toward the highway, straight into the trap." Josie's pulse thundered in her ears. She clutched her sketchbook, knuckles white, wishing she could shout, "We have to do something!" But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she sketched the canyons, remembering how Star had once disappeared through a secret pass, vanishing like a ghost into the stone and sage. Martha knelt beside her, gentle but urgent. "Josie, you know these hills better than anyone. Where would Star go if he was scared? Can you show us?" Josie nodded, flipping to a map she'd drawn, her own private study of the Red Canyons, with animal trails, hidden washes, and shortcuts only the wild ones knew. She pointed to a narrow gulch just east of the old quarry. Martha's eyes lit up. "That's it. That's their best shot." Theo leaned over. "If we can get them through the gulch, they'll be safe on Martha's land. Her property is a registered sanctuary. Once the Mustangs cross that fence, Langston can't touch them. It's federal." But there was a catch. The gulch was narrow, rocky, nearly invisible from above. Someone would have to guide the herd, signaling them at just the right moment while the helicopters and wranglers closed in. Iris hesitated, glancing at Josie. "We need someone the horses trust. someone they'll follow. Josie looked at Martha, the riders, and then back to her map. She swallowed hard, heart beating so fast it hurt. She was terrified. But the memory of the mustangs standing guard over her in the storm, Star's steady gaze, the circle of hooves, rose up inside her like a shield. Martha squeezed her shoulder. You can do this, Josie. We'll be with you every step. The plan formed quickly. Martha and Theo would climb to a high overlook with Josie, armed with mirrors and whistles, tools used by old-time wranglers to communicate across long distances. Hawk and the riders would run interference, blocking Langston's men as long as they could. Iris would be ready at the sanctuary fence, opening the gates for the mustangs. The team moved out, nerves tight, every minute counting down to disaster. Josie rode behind Martha on her ATV, clutching the map, hair whipping in the wind. The sky buzzed with the angry hum of helicopters as they climbed to the overlook, a bare, rocky perch that offered a view of the entire valley below. From up there, the drama unfolded like a battle. The mustangs were running, hundreds of them, coats flashing in the sun, led by Star's unmistakable black and white blaze. Behind them, riders on ATVs and trucks yelled and waved, herding the terrified animals toward the highway and the waiting corrals. The helicopter swooped low, its rotor wash scattering dust and sage, driving the herd into tighter and tighter clusters. Josie's hands shook, but she held up her mirror, catching the sunlight and flashing it in a pattern she'd practiced for days. Martha blew her whistle, one long blast, then two, short, over and over. Theo's camera drone buzzed into the sky, capturing every moment. At first, it seemed hopeless. The mustangs panicked, scattering in all directions. Several foals stumbled and almost fell. Star reared, whinnying, rallying the herd, his body a living banner of defiance. Josie watched, willing him to see her. "Come on, Star," Martha whispered. "Trust us." And then, miracle, Star's ears flicked. He spotted the glint of the mirror, the flash of sunlight from Josie's signal. He turned sharply, whinnying to his herd, and like a river finding its path, the mustangs shifted direction, surging toward the narrow mouth of the gulch. Langston's wranglers realized too late. "They're turning," someone yelled into a radio. The helicopter banked hard, swooping toward the gulch, but the rocks were too close, the air too turbulent. The pilot pulled back, unable to follow. Theo filmed it all, voice shaking with excitement. "They're making it! Come on!" Down in the canyon, the mustangs thundered through the secret pass, hooves sparking on stone, tails streaming like banners in the wind. Josie held her breath, counting each horse, praying they'd all make it. At the far end, just beyond the sanctuary fence, Iris waved her arms, opening the gate wide. Hawk and the riders formed a human barrier, blocking Langston's men from getting any closer. Star was the last to enter, pausing at the sanctuary boundary. He looked up, right at Josie on the ridge. For a heartbeat, time held still. Josie lifted her mirror one last time, and Star dipped his head in solemn acknowledgement, then trotted after his herd. The gates slammed shut behind them. Martha threw her arms around Josie, laughing and crying at the same time. Theo captured the whole scene. Tears, cheers, the wild herd at last safe inside the boundaries of the sanctuary. Hawk whooped, the riders revving their bikes in celebration. But down on the plains, Langston was livid. He stormed over to the county officials, waving paperwork and shouting into his phone. The news crews, alerted by Theo's viral videos, descended, cameras rolling, microphones thrust forward. Iris hugged Josie, whispering, "You did it. You saved them." Josie looked around at her team, their exhaustion, their joy, their wild, fierce loyalty. For the first time, she felt not just relief, but pride. She had stood between the wild and the storm, just like Star had done for her. As the sun dipped low, painting the canyons with molten gold, Josie glanced at her sketchbook as she drew a new picture, a girl on a rocky ridge, signaling with a mirror, a black stallion leading his herd to safety. The fight wasn't over. Langston still had cards to play, but for now, the mustangs were free. And Josie, silent but unbreakable, had found her courage where she least expected it. The news spread through town before the dust from the chase even settled. By noon, video footage of the Mustang stampede, shot by Theo's drone and edited with Iris's voiceover about their rare bloodlines, was trending across social media. Local reporters had picked it up, but now national outlets were calling, and the eyes of the whole country seemed to land on this wild corner of Wyoming. The Iron Ridge riders made sure nobody could get near the sanctuary. Their motorcycles, parked in a solid line at the entrance, sent a message: no one touches these Mustangs. Josie found herself surrounded by protectors, friends, and, for the first time, believers. Yet, beneath the celebration, an uneasy current ran through the air. Langston wasn't giving up. That afternoon, Josie sat on the porch, knees drawn to her chest, watching clouds roll over the hills. Every now and then, someone from town would drive by, slowing to stare at the line of bikes and the gathering crowd. Some faces looked worried, others just curious. A few, Josie saw, looked angry. Inside the house, Martha, Iris, and Theo were huddled over legal papers and laptops, strategizing for the next assault. The video of the illegal roundup, Pennington's confession, and Langston's contractors pushing the Mustangs toward the helicopter had exploded online, drawing sharp comments and calls for justice. This could mean real consequences for Langston, Martha said, her voice taut with hope and doubt, but only if we push hard and fast. Langston himself wasn't hiding. Instead, he doubled down, issuing a statement to the local press blaming outside agitators for interfering with a necessary public safety operation. He painted himself as the only thing standing between chaos and order, insisting the wild horses were dangerous, the sanctuary illegal, and the activists reckless. That evening, the town council called an emergency hearing at the community center. A squat cinder block building with peeling paint and an American flag out front. As the sun set, people streamed inside. Ranchers in dusty jeans and work shirts, retirees clutching thermoses of coffee, young parents with wide-eyed children. The riders arrived in force, as did Martha and Iris. Theo set up his camera by the back wall, determined to record every word. Josie didn't want to go at first, but Evelyn squeezed her hand. "This is your chance, baby. If you feel ready, they need to hear from you." The hall was packed and tense. Town officials sat up front, papers stacked in front of them, while Langston, immaculate as ever in a tailored suit, took a seat just off to the side, flanked by his lawyers. Pennington sat at the end, eyes downcast, shame still heavy in his features. Evelyn, Hawk, and Iris all spoke. They described the Mustangs' history, their role in the ecosystem, the proof of their rare bloodlines. Iris read aloud from the university's confirmation letter. Martha recounted the night of the storm and Josie's rescue, her voice steady but raw with emotion. Langston rose to reply, voice booming. "These animals are a public hazard. What happened yesterday was chaos. My contractors were legally hired. My permits are in order. The sanctuary is not properly registered. It puts our town at risk. I intend to seek legal remedy." Boos and mutters rippled through the crowd. Hawk stood and pointed directly at Langston. "You don't care about this land or these horses. You just want your lodge. And you don't care who you run over to get it." Langston glared back. "I care about the community's future, about jobs, safety, prosperity, not sentiment." The mayor raised a hand. "Let's finish hearing all sides." Suddenly, all eyes turned to Josie. She stood at the edge of the room, knees shaking, palms slick with sweat. For weeks she'd been silent, letting others speak for her. Now, the memories of the storm, the circle of Mustangs, the courage she'd seen in Star, rose inside her like a wave. Evelyn gently nudged her forward. Martha gave her a thumbs up. Theo's camera light blinked red. Josie's breath rattled in her chest. She stepped to the microphone, small and pale, her voice a whisper as she tried to speak. For a moment nothing came. The whole room seemed to hold its breath. Then, trembling, Josie looked at Langston, at the council, at the crowd of strangers and friends. She saw Star's eyes in her mind, the courage that had once saved her. In voice barely audible, she began, He didn't run from me, so I won't run from him." The words hung in the air, gentle but unbreakable. Josie took another breath, stronger this time. "I know what it's like to be lost, to be scared. That herd saved my life in the storm. They watched over me when I couldn't watch over myself, and they're not dangerous. They're not a nuisance. They belong here, just like we do. We have to protect them, because if we don't, we lose something we can never get back." The silence in the room was total. Every face turned toward her, even Langston stilled for a heartbeat. Tears filled Evelyn's eyes. Hawk nodded, fierce and proud. Josie's voice, though thin, didn't break. They're wild. That's what makes them beautiful. We can't let fear or money take that away. Not for a hotel, not for anything. Please, don't let them take what makes this place special." There was a moment, a heartbeat where no one spoke, where her words seemed to echo off the old cinder block walls and settle into people's bones. Then, one by one, people began to clap. First, Martha, and Harriet, then Iris. Then, slowly, the whole room. The applause rose, wild and cathartic, a tide of support that even Josie's shyness could not silence. Langston looked shaken, but not defeated. His eyes darted to his lawyers, his face tightening with calculation. But the mood had shifted. Even some of his supporters looked away, uncomfortable. The mayor leaned forward. Thank you, Josie. You've reminded us what's really at stake here. The council will review all the evidence, including the university's letter and the footage of the roundup. We'll put a hold on any removal of the mustangs until this is resolved. And we will launch a formal investigation into Mr. Langston's conduct and the actions of county officials. As the meeting ended, people gathered around Josie, offering hugs, handshakes, and thanks. Reporters jostled for quotes. Hawk gave her his club's patch, a Mustang rearing under a full moon, and Iris promised, "You made all the difference, kid." Outside, the riders revved their engines and whooped, the town's children watching in awe. Josie slipped out the back, tears running down her cheeks, relief, pride, and the first taste of belonging she'd felt since her parents' accident. Back at the sanctuary, the herd grazed peacefully, unaware of how close they'd come to losing everything. Star lifted his head, scanning the horizon, as if sensing a change in the wind. Josie sat on the fence, sketchbook open, her hand steady for the first time in months. She drew herself, not small, not lost, but standing tall beside a herd that now belonged to everyone. Above, the Wyoming sky blazed with stars, and in that quiet, Josie finally understood. Courage didn't have to be loud. Sometimes it was simply you refusing to walk away. The days that followed the town meeting felt different, lighter, somehow. For the first time since her parents' accident, Josie woke without a stone pressing on her chest. The whole community was talking, but this time, the talk was hopeful. The Mustangs were safe, at least for now. Langston was being investigated. The council was reviewing the sanctuary's application with support from wildlife agencies and the state university. Everywhere Josie went, people she barely knew greeted her with a smile or a nod, and sometimes, shy but sincere, thanked her for speaking up. But the real magic was on the land itself. Early each morning, the sun rose over the hills, gilding the grass and sage with gold. Josie would slip on her boots, grab her battered sketchbook, and walk out to the new fence line. There, she watched the herd as they grazed in the fresh dawn. Stars standing sentinel, foals racing each other under their mother's watchful eyes. The sanctuary sign was still just a wooden plank, nailed to a post, painted by hand. Whispering Plains Mustang Sanctuary. It wasn't official yet, but everyone in town started using the name anyway. Evelyn was the first to make it real. "We'll donate the south pasture and the old barn," she said, voice unwavering, as she signed the papers with the council and the wildlife agents. "It's what this land was always meant for." Her pride was evident, her chin lifted, her eyes bright with unshed tears as Josie hugged her tight. "You did this, baby," Evelyn whispered. "You made us a family again." Iris moved in for a week, taking up residence in the barn office to monitor the herd and run her makeshift field lab. She was up before sunrise every day, checking on the foals and treating any small injuries or ticks, sometimes with Josie at her side. "You've got away with them," Iris said one morning, handing Josie a soft brush to stroke a young colt's tangled mane. "They know you're not here to tame them, just to understand them." Martha took up her role as mentor, sharing stories of the old mustangs, the history of the land, and tricks for reading the herd's moods. She even recruited a handful of local teens, city kids and ranch kids alike, to start a junior ranger program. "The wild needs protectors, and the young ones have the heart for it," she told Josie. "So do you." Even Theo, whose viral videos had brought the Mustangs to national attention, returned with a new camera crew to film a follow-up documentary. "America loves a comeback," he grinned, setting up interviews with Josie, Evelyn, Iris, and Hawk. "But what people really want is hope. You gave them that." And the hope wasn't just for the horses. School groups came to visit, led by Josie and Theo on an ATV tour of the sanctuary. Josie found her voice growing stronger with each outing. She spoke about the herd's history, the science of wild bloodlines, the night the storm nearly took her, and how Star and his Mustangs stood guard. "They didn't save me because I was special," she'd say, her voice trembling with newfound confidence. "They saved me because that's what wild things do. They look out for their own." At the end of each tour, Josie would guide the group to a safe overlook where Star could often be seen, black hide shimmering in the sunlight, his family all around. Sometimes, if the wind was right, he'd toss his head and gallop, leading the whole herd in a thundering run that left visitors gasping in awe. One afternoon, as a group of school kids cheered Star's charge across the plains, a little girl with bright red braids sidled up to Josie, eyes wide with wonder. "Aren't you afraid of them?" she asked. Josie smiled, remembering the terror and awe of her first night in the storm. "I was, but not anymore. They taught me to be brave." The girl nodded, as if that was all the answer she needed. Meanwhile, Hawk and the Iron Ridge Riders took charge of security, ensuring no one, developer, hunter, or curiosity seeker, crossed into the sanctuary without permission. They even organized a fundraising ride, drawing in bikers from 3 states and raising money for fencing, feed, and veterinary care. The event ended with a sunset bonfire, stories told, and laughter shared under the vast Wyoming sky. News outlets kept calling. Langston, under state investigation for fraud and illegal pressure on county officials, had disappeared from public view. Pennington resigned quietly, replaced by a local woman who'd grown up riding Mustangs bareback as a child. The mood across town shifted, suspicion replaced by pride, and a growing sense that this little patch of prairie was something worth saving. But for Josie, the greatest change was inside herself. One evening, after the last tour had gone home and the sun dipped behind the hills, she sat with Evelyn and Martha on the porch. The air was filled with the scent of sage and new-mown grass, the silence broken only by the far-off whinny of a colt. Evelyn rocked slowly, her voice soft. "You did good, Josie. You made a difference." Martha added, "You found your voice, just like I always knew you would. And you used it for something wild and beautiful." Josie looked out at the sanctuary, the shapes of the herd dark against the pink sky. She thought of her parents. The ache still there, but softened. She thought of Star, of that first terrible night, and all the fear she'd carried since. She reached for her sketchbook and drew, her family on the porch, the Mustangs in the twilight, her own figure in the center. Finally at home. For the first time, she signed her name in bold, sweeping letters. As darkness fell, a gentle breeze rose, rustling through the grass and carrying with it the whisper of hooves, a promise that, here on the whispering plains, the wild would endure. And in her heart, Josie knew she'd found what she'd been missing, not just a place, but a purpose in a herd of her own. The last weeks of summer bled gently into fall, and the sanctuary became a part of the landscape, something as enduring as the endless Wyoming sky. The wild Mustangs, once ghosts in the storm, now belonged as much to the town as to the hills. Fences were rebuilt and painted, the old barn cleaned and transformed into an education center, its walls lined with Josie's sketches and Theo's framed photos. Whispering Plains Mustang Sanctuary was official now. The paperwork stamped, the federal seal shining, the name recognized on maps and in local schools. Even the governor sent a letter of congratulations, read aloud at a small ceremony on a windblown afternoon. But Josie cared little for the speeches or the sudden bursts of attention. She found herself happiest in quiet moments, brushing a foal in the morning light with Iris, learning how to patch a fence alongside Martha, or simply sitting on the sun-warmed porch next to Evelyn, watching the herd drift through golden grass. Life, once broken and colorless, now moved with its own gentle rhythm. Every day brought new tasks, doctoring a cut on a filly's leg, helping Hawk and the riders lay a fresh stretch of fencing, sketching a new scene for the visitors' center. Each job left Josie more sure of her place in this world. The town changed too. What had started with suspicion and argument slowly became pride. The local diner hung a mural of the Mustangs. School children voted to make Star their new mascot, and tourists arrived by the vanload. Yet, through it all, the land held its quiet, wild dignity. Josie felt it every time she walked alone out to the high ridge, the place where the circle of hooves had first stood guard over her in the storm. One evening, as a honey-colored dusk settled over the sanctuary, Josie found herself back on that ridge, sketchbook in hand. The wind was soft, the air touched by the first hints of autumn. Below her, the Mustang herd grazed peacefully. Star, regal and black, moved with quiet authority through the tall grass. Josie could see the foals, now nearly grown, their legs long and sure. And beside Star, just at the edge of the herd, stood a tiny, wobbly-legged foal with a bold white blaze like a jagged comet. Josie caught her breath, the sight both ordinary and miraculous. Footsteps approached behind her. Martha, boots crunching in the grass, eased herself down on a weathered log beside Josie. For a long while, they sat in companionable silence, watching the sun settle behind the hills. "He's not alone anymore," Martha said softly, her eyes on Star and the new foal. "Neither are you." Josie nodded, hugging her knees to her chest. The ache that had haunted her, the sense of being lost and small in a world too big, felt different now. Not gone, but changed, softened into something bearable. She thought of her parents, and for the first time in a long while, the memory didn't sting quite so sharply. Instead, it felt like the warmth of sunlight on her back. A gentle push forward. A flash of movement caught her eye. A second stallion, chestnut and strong, appearing on the far side of the ridge. The new leader, perhaps? Or maybe just a friend. Either way, Star didn't chase him off. The herd shifted and flowed, making room, forging something new from what had nearly been lost. Down at the barn, the evening tour wrapped up. Josie heard laughter and the high, clear voices of children as Theo led them back toward the trucks. Iris's dog barked, and someone called for one last look at the Mustangs before dark. The world felt full, not empty. Martha sighed, content. "You know, people think you have to tame what's wild to make it worthwhile. They think order is safer than freedom. But you proved otherwise, Josie. Sometimes the bravest thing is just to listen, to stand with what you don't understand, and let it change you." Josie didn't reply. She just watched the foal nudge against Star, saw the way the herd's shadows stretched long across the grass, felt the wind tug at her hair, and heard the low, steady drum of hooves in the soil. In that moment, she understood what belonging really meant. Not ownership or control, but the willingness to care, to stand guard, to be changed by something bigger than yourself. She picked up her pencil, sketching the new foal, Star, and the whole herd in their sunset glow. She drew herself too, smaller than the horses, but part of the picture, woven into the wildness rather than standing apart. For the first time, her hand didn't shake. Later, after the light faded and the world was left to the stars, Josie and Martha walked back toward the house. From the porch, Evelyn waved, holding up a tray of cocoa mugs. The air was filled with the scent of hay and distant wood smoke, and all around them the prairie whispered with secrets, promises kept, fears faced, second chances granted beneath the open sky. Josie sat between Martha and Evelyn, cocoa warming her hands. The sounds of the sanctuary settled around her. Horses snorting, dogs barking, a coyote singing somewhere in the distance. It felt like home. On the far ridge, Star lingered a moment, head high, his outline etched against the darkening sky. The new foal danced beside him, stumbling, getting up again, determined to learn the ways of the wild. A second stallion joined them, and then the herd moved off together, merging into the shadows. Josie whispered, her voice steady and sure, "He's not ours, but he let us stay." And in the hush that followed, the wind carried dust and hoofbeats into the dusk, a song of belonging that needed no words. You don't need to tame what's wild. You just need to listen. Courage doesn't always sound loud. Sometimes it's a quiet girl who refuses to walk away. And sometimes the ones we save are the ones who save us. Like if you believe in second chances, share if you've ever been changed by something wild. Subscribe for more stories where the hoofbeats speak louder than words.